I live in an orchard. It looks like a city, but I kid you not, it is an orchard. See, I moved here 10 years ago, and then it looked like a city to me. But 5 years ago, I had a life-altering experience that forever changed the way that I see the city. Now, that moment, that experience, that life-altering experience, are you ready? For the first time in my life, I picked a piece of fruit from a tree. And now when I walk through my neighborhood, this is what I can find growing within 1 block of my house. Sweet cherries, sour cherries, service berries, mulberries, peaches, apricots, plums, ginkgo, black walnuts, sumac, apples, crab apples, elderberries, pears, and plums. I want to show you this orchard. And I want to share with you what these fruit trees in this city have taught me. They've taught me a thing or two about how to change the world. When I first moved here 10 years ago, my first job in the city was at a garden, and I was teaching kids how to grow their own food. Now, I'd never really gardened before, but I came to the job as an environmental educator, so I thought I had so much to teach these kids. But I was quickly put in my place when I realized that they did not want to listen to me. They wanted to play in the garden. They wanted to water the plants, to weed, to watch the insects flutter from one plant to the next. And one of my garden mentors, she put it into perspective when she said, "The garden is one of the greatest teachers. Even when you think that it has taught you everything, it teaches you humility." And so that first time, when I had a chance to pick a piece of fruit from a tree, I was like those kids in the garden. I was captivated by these fruit trees. I wanted to do this more and more. I wanted to play. And I realized that over the past 5 years, since that first moment, that the fruit trees have been my teachers. And they have taught me to engage my whole self, head, hands, and heart. It was an apple, a heritage apple. That was my first piece of fruit that I picked from a tree. See, there's a museum that's not too far from my house where heritage apple trees are growing on the property. And most years, those fruit trees were just overloaded with apples. And at the same time, 5 years ago, I was volunteering with a nonprofit in the neighborhood, and they were about to start up a new farmers market. So, this museum and this nonprofit, they got talking, and they asked themselves, couldn't something be done to put all of these apples to good use? At this point, remember, I'd never picked a piece of fruit from a tree before. I'd never heard of the museum, and I couldn't even spot a fruit tree from any other piece of greenery in the city. But for whatever reason, this question landed in my inbox. And because it sounded like fun, you know, picking some fruit on a lovely Saturday morning, I said yes. So I pulled together a few friends, we set a date, and it was only really the night before that I realized I had no idea what I was getting into. But I was able to search online, how to pick an apple. And there were a few really helpful instructional videos that got me on my way. So the very next day, there we were, and I did it. I picked a piece of fruit from a tree. We had a great time that first morning, picking apples. It was really delightful. And when we brought the apples over to this new farmer's market, we were offering them up for any passersby to taste. They were these gnarly little apples, these tiny little gnarled up fruits. And we were trying to get anybody to have a taste because these were heritage flavors. These were flavors that you could not get in the grocery store. And people would look a little sideways at them at first, but when they had a taste, they were impressed. This is from the city? Yeah. And I could see that their perceptions were changing, even just a little bit. And my eyes were being opened too. See, they would come to the table to taste some of the apples, but they would also come with stories about other fruit trees in the neighborhood. We have a cherry tree in our yard, and we can never keep up with that harvest. My neighbor has a pear tree. Have you seen it just a few blocks over? And for me, I didn't move house, but that was the moment when I started to live in an orchard. It was like I put on this pair of fruit goggles, these special lenses that would allow me to spot a fruit tree where I had never seen a fruit tree before. They would just pop out of these odd places. I would peer over fences, sneaking into people's backyards. I would meander down laneways, trying to spot another one. There'd be one over there, and one over there, and another across the way. And when you start to string together all of these fruit trees, you realize that we are living in the midst of a vast urban orchard that spans the entire city. And this is what those fruit goggles have enabled me to see. Here in this city, every year, trees in Toronto produce 1.5 million pounds of fruit. That is the weight of 10,000 people. That is the weight of everybody in my hometown times 2. That is the weight of the Statue of Liberty times 3. That weight in fruit from our trees. Within city limits, this is not a concerted effort saying we will grow all of our fruit to eat. This is what is already growing there between the stitches of our urban fabric. This is when the fruit trees offered up their first lesson to me. And it starts up here in the head. They said, "Open your eyes. Put on your fruit goggles. Seek out the potential, and you will see what is possible." Cherries. The first fruits that we picked were cherries in the next season. Because over that winter, after those apples had been harvested, we decided, okay, it's not just those few fruit trees that are on the museum property as a remnant of our past. No, fruit trees are alive and well in the city, and so many of these are not getting picked. So I gathered together some friends and some allies, and we started to make a plan. We researched what other people were doing in other cities, and this is what we decided for Toronto. We would start picking fruit from residential properties in Toronto. We would start with one neighborhood, and we would grow from there. We would share everything, 1/3 to the homeowner, 1/3 to the volunteers, and 1/3 would be delivered directly to a food bank or shelter in the neighborhood. We would do it all by bike, because we were busy dreaming big. We drafted a volunteer call out, and we called the whole thing Not Far from the Tree. That first season, the blossoms, we were so excited when the blossoms came out. And by the time the cherries ripened, we were ready to go. I remember our first pick. A group of strangers convened in another stranger's backyard, and we were met there with these 2 enormous cherry trees just bursting with fruit. Up to that point, I was doubting myself, thinking, is this really worthwhile? But wow, those cherry trees. And we were having fun, grown adults clambering up this tree, picking fruit, sharing stories. It was an amazing experience. And I got to take home my own little bowl afterwards. Next up that year were apricots. I was amazed at the bumper crop of apricots that year. And before this point, I had never had a fresh apricot before. All that I had eaten were those shriveled brown things that come in plastic packaging from far, far away. But I remember this one apricot tree where the tree actually overhung a garage roof. So I perched atop that garage roof, and I could just reach out and pick the apricots right there. The tree was actually overloaded with these apricots, and as we picked more and more, these golden globes of sweet deliciousness, that the branches were actually starting to lift because we were taking the burden of weight off of their limbs. It was incredible to be able to just reach out right there and taste that amazing fruit. And at that time, as I still am today, I was struggling with some huge global issues. How do we make sense of climate change, hunger, poverty? This one fact stuck with me, that we actually produce enough food to feed everybody in this world. And yet nearly 1 billion people go hungry every day. There's a huge disconnect there. It's about access, it's about distribution. But there I was, perched atop that garage roof, and I could see that in my neighborhood, here was an abundance of fruit that was too much for the homeowner to handle. And I knew that part of what we were harvesting that day was going to go to a drop-in lunch program around the corner. So here's where the fruit trees offered up their second lesson to me. And it has to do with the hands. Do something. Do something tangible. Reach out and take action. So we picked more fruit. We handed out flyers. We told our friends. We blogged about it. We picked more fruit. We told the media. We bought hand crank headlamps so that we could pick late into the fall when the days got shorter, reach right into that dense urban forest and pick more fruit. By the end of that first season, Not Far From the Tree was gaining a lot of momentum. That first call out for volunteers, that attracted 150 people to come help out. We picked 3,003 pounds of fruit that year, and now, 5 years later, we have picked nearly 50,000 pounds of fruit from 775 trees in this city. That first call out for volunteers, it's now increased tenfold, 1,500 people who want to reach out and pick fruit too. We've been able to help other groups in other cities all around the world start up similar projects. And yeah, we are doing it by bike. We've got a fleet of 11 cargo bikes transporting our fruit and equipment around the city. I'm amazed at the success of this project. I mean, I'll have days where I'll look in the mirror and I'll say, Laura, you are just picking fruit. It is a trivial act. Who do you think you are? But I know there's something more to it. And so a year ago, as I was struggling with this, I asked a friend who's a writer to help me put some words to this. She came back to me with a letter, and embedded in that text was a phrase that she doesn't even recall writing, but that I have kept with me, sort of turning over in my pocket for the last year. She said, "Not far from the tree makes our best selves manifest." It makes our best selves manifest. All at once, this was the highest compliment that could ever be paid to a social change initiative. And on the other hand, a huge challenge. What does that mean? That's an intense statement. Is that really what we're doing? So I turned to my own experience to try to figure this out. I was compelled to take part in the first place because it was fun. And once I became engaged, it started in my head, and I started to see things differently. My head was buzzing with this excitement. And then it came into my hands. They started to tingle as I wanted to reach out, and that perception started to take action. My head, my hands. But there's more. There's heart. My whole self has been engaged. Head, hands, and heart. And I think that that is the most important lesson that the fruit trees have taught me, is that when you engage your whole self, then something changes. And the heart part is the most difficult to describe, but I know the feeling, and I think that you do too. It's when something is more meaningful than you ever could have imagined. It's when you are part of something that is bigger than yourself. It's an emotional connection, a cultural connection, something that is deeper inside of us. And in that space, when your heart is engaged, that initial fun that attracted you to it, it transforms into a kind of joy. And when your whole self is engaged, head, hands, heart, in a joyful act, then you are poised to make your best self manifest.